I am lucky. I have few special needs when it comes to my ability to learn and achieve. But I have seen students struggle with their own learning due to a variety of circumstances: learning disabilities, medical issues, family tragedies, etc. And as a classroom teacher, it was not difficult for me to accommodate these students because I had a personal relationship with them. I knew them and understood what could be done to help them succeed. However, in my years of classroom teaching, I never had to work with students who faced physical disabilities that could interfere with learning. Limited vision and hearing loss had never been disabilities that I had to consider when creating my lessons. Only now, as an e-learning professional, have I had to think about these disabilities and apply ADA requirements and 508 compliance to every one of my lessons. And the most difficult part about this is that I do not have a personal relationship with those whom I am accommodating. I rely on research and general guidelines to form my lessons, and although it lacks the personal touch, I have found this research fascinating, as there is so much new technology that can be learned and utilized to help those with audiovisual disabilities. My story starts when I moved to Colorado. My first job in Denver was as a technical writer and data analyst. I was required to analyze ground movement and map thousands of miniature seismic events that occurred during ground drilling. When mapping these events during analysis, we used multiple colors to identify different stages of the process. It was during this position that I was made aware of the difficulties of reading these maps due to color blindness. Although the colors were completely distinct to me, my colorblind manager was unable to differentiate among many of the stages because the contrast of these colors was not great enough. As a result, we had to determine a color scheme containing shades that differed in hue, tint, and contrast. This was my first introduction to accommodating for a visual impairment. Learning to accommodate for this impairment also taught me a lot about design principles, which I found fascinating. By the time I left that position, I knew more about color blindness and its limitations than my colorblind boss. This knowledge followed me as I returned to instructional design within the e-learning community. I now consider my color choices with a greater understanding of how hues and tints may be perceived by others, and how it can affect their grasp on material presented visually. When I stepped back into education as an e-learning designer for a compliance training company, one of the first training programs I created was about discrimination in the workplace. I learned, really for the first time, about the requirements set forth by the ADA and ADAAA. The ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed in 1990 and prohibits discrimination of disabled workers in the workplace. It also requires that employers make reasonable accommodations for disabled employees. It was amended in 2008 to expand upon the definition of disability, essentially covering more people who struggle with physical, mental, and medical impairments. The first thing I noticed after writing this training piece was that the old building I worked in was inaccessible to anyone with a physical disability, confining them to a wheelchair. There were stairs connecting different sections of the building, but absolutely no ramps. I found this concerning and wondered how an accommodation could be made to suit a wheelchair-bound employee. I have now become much more aware of building layouts and their ADA accessibility. Once the topic was pointed out to me, I couldn't help but notice the difficulties that those with physical disabilities face everywhere. My job also focuses on applying new regulations regarding visual and auditory impairments to all of the training programs we create. This means that each and every online training program we produce must meet federal standards of usability for the hearing impaired and visually challenged. Section 508 is an amendment to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and was originally implemented in 1986 to deal with electronic and information technologies. Section 508 requires that all federal agencies make their electronic and information technology accessible to people with physical, sensory, or cognitive disabilities. The amendment contains technical criteria specific to various types of technologies. The standard that applies to our training programs is that a text equivalent for every non-text element shall be provided. This is one of 16 standards for 508 compliance within HTML. When creating lessons, we write alternative text describing all visual elements for those using a screen reader. In addition, it is our policy to create each lesson so that any user could take the course with or without sound, which is a complete audio voiceover of the information. As an instructional designer, focusing on this level of equity within my courses has helped make me aware of the difficulties many face while learning that I had never before considered. By simply learning about the standard accommodations that would make my courses 508 compliant, I was introduced to new ways of differentiating my instruction that appealed to many more students. In addition, I have found that it is important to make consideration of these accommodations part of my everyday practice, not just an afterthought. When I first began implementing alt text into my courses, I would finish the course, then go back and add the accommodating information to each slide. By doing this, I found that some of my text became redundant, so I started thinking about visual disabilities as I designed each part of my course. I found that this not only saved time, but ensured that I considered auditory and visual disabilities throughout the entire creation process. I have found that increasing my awareness of these disabilities has encouraged me to notice their need among the general public on an almost daily basis. Now that I focus on these accommodations, I see their need everywhere. I've witnessed people using screen readers on multiple occasions while traveling on the light rail. I've noticed the signs of those who cannot hear well. I realize that these accommodations help a large number of people, and I am so proud to say that I am aware and proactive toward easing the burden faced by people with these disabilities.